Welcome to Ultra, and thanks for trying it out. I want to give you an explanation as to what ULTRAWAVE is, seeing as it's the main form of synthesis in this oscillator. You may have heard of wavetable synthesis, where you have a number of small samples that represent cycles, and they can be switched out during playback to change the tone. And ULTRAWAVE is similar to a wavetable, except that it has a pitch curve, an amp curve, an attack transient, a length, and automatic playback. So what that allows you to do is model realistic sounds like vocals. But it also lets you do wavetable things like warping cycles. And sampler type things like time stretching. So one way to show you what an ULTRAWAVE is to build one from the ground up. I'm going to run a manual import on a sample of a short bass guitar. Now you can tell that it's a note because there's a repeating pattern of cycles here. So let's say we want to grab this particular cycle and bring it into our wavetable timeline. And now the engine will play back this cycle over and over, creating this note, which sounds nothing like our original bass, but the reason is that this bass evolves over time. It starts with a cycle that looks a little bit like that, but by the time it gets to the end, things have changed. So if I grab this cycle from the end and put it into our timeline, you can hear the sound evolves from this sharper tone to a more mild tone, which doesn't quite sound like the original bass, so I'm going to keep adding cycles until it does. So that's sounding a lot closer, but one thing it's missing is this section at the start here. So you can see this section's a bit different. It isn't the same length, and it doesn't seem to match the other cycles. So I'm going to add it as an attack sample. So that sounds a lot better, and we're now getting the sound of the pick attack. I can turn the body off here, and that's the sound of the attack sample. I'll turn the body back on. So now we've got a really good sounding bass, but the difference is, unlike the original sample, our bass can sustain. So we've created a bass from a very short sample. This one was 273 milliseconds long. But let's say we wanted to extend that and make it as if the bass player had played a nice long sustained note. So I'm going to come over here to the Edit Cycles panel, and I'm going to change the length from 273 milliseconds to, say, 5 seconds. I'm going to select Crop or Extend because we're going to extend the sound. So now you can see our cycles have been moved to the front of the sound, and the timeline is now 5 seconds long. So the sound is going to sustain on the final cycle, but we want to create a more muted cycle. So we're going to select it and copy it. We're going to move the playhead to the end of the timeline and paste it. And now we're going to filter this final cycle and make it sound more like the end of a long sustained note, more dull. So I'm going to adjust this filter knob, and I can hit this preview button to hear what it's going to sound like. And that sounds pretty good. It's darker, but it's not a pure sine wave. So I'm going to hit apply. And now when I play the sound, it's going to take 5 seconds. And it's going to evolve from the cycles that we imported to something more muted at the end. So the previous example showed you the attack sample and the cycles of the ULTRAWAVE. I'm now going to show you how the pitch and amp curves work. So I'm going to run another manual import, this time on a kick drum. Alright, so here we have a nice fat kick drum sample. And the thing with the kick drum is it usually does a sweep from high pitch to low pitch over time. So a lot of its flavor is based on that pitch curve, how far apart the cycles are. So we're going to need to make sure we've got these pitch and amp tick boxes ticked. And now we're going to zoom in and start selecting cycles. Select an area, hit Add Cycle, select another area, add cycle again. And as I select, it's snapping to 0 crossings, which is pretty important. Now there is a shortcut to all of this. If you have an area selected, you can actually just hit Enter on your keyboard, and that will add the cycle for you. If you hit the right arrow, it'll move to the next cycle. So you can just very quickly start to add all the information you want. And we're almost done. Now, as we've been adding cycles to this timeline, we've also been adding pitch points and amp points to these two graphs. So let's hear what it sounds like. And that's getting pretty close, but you may see that the final point on the amp curve is at full volume, which isn't what we want. We want this to come down to silence. So we could drag this down. Or another option is to look at the toolbar on the right and select Import Amp Curve, which will bring in the entire amp curve from the original sample. All right, so let's hear what this sounds like. And that sounds perfect. So we've looked at the amp curve information. Let's take a quick look at the pitch curve. So you may notice that the first cycle is up 8 octaves and starts to descend very quickly down to our root note, which is D#1. So if we jump out here to the synth, because it's an ULTRAWAVE, we can start to do things like play with the speed. Or you could start to warp the cycles. Another aspect of ULTRAWAVE is that you can import multiple sounds into a map, sort of like a multi-sampler. So here I have another bass guitar. And the difference between this and a multi-sampler is that if I play a note in the middle, instead of just picking the nearest sample, it's actually going to create a hybrid wavetable on the fly, which is a blend of the 4 points around it. So what that means is, if you play notes that you don't have the sample for, it's going to mean a smooth transition between the notes rather than pitching things up and down like a sampler would. So you can make a pretty realistic model of a sound, even if you don't have that many samples to start with. Another feature of ULTRAWAVE is that it supports stereo wavetables. And the reason this hasn't been done before is it doesn't really make any sense unless you've got some way to get the channels out of phase, like a pitch curve or an attack sample. So this is the automatic import, and it has taken my audio file and detected that there are 4 samples in it, so it's going to split it into 4 different sounds. And here is the automatic import page, and you can see that it's similar to the manual import, except that the cycles have been automatically chosen for you. You can play the original sample and the ULTRAWAVE version out of the engine. That looks good, so I'm going to hit next. And this is the second sample. Let's process the other 2. And they've been placed in the map. Now what I can do is distribute the velocities so that I get a different blend of the 4 sounds depending on how hard I hit the note. If you go into the Edit Sound page, you can now see that there are 2 channels of cycles. There are 2 amp curves. You can have 2 pitch curves. There are 2 attacks. And it all adds up to a nice wide sound. I hope that's given you some insight into the basics of ULTRAWAVE. We think it's pretty special. ULTRAWAVE is just one of 6 different oscillator types in Ultra. Be sure to check out the free trial at ultra.audio. Thanks for watching.